Okay, this is going to be a series of videos on floor plan symbols. I'm breaking it up into shorter uh, pieces, kind of explain and elaborate a little bit more on what the book has to say. So we're going to start with walls, and uh, get my mouse over here. The one thing to remember with CAD is we draw things exactly the size they are. Now, when we are doing the floor plan for this project, we're not going to draw the exterior wall as thick as the exterior wall actually is. One of the things you run into is the thickness of siding, and different siding types have different thicknesses. And with just plain vanilla AutoCAD, it's rather difficult to dimension to the exterior portion of the framing. So that's why we're drawing our exterior walls slightly different. Now, once we start using Revit to do 3D modeling, then we'll be able to include the siding and still dimension to um, the framing. So one thing to remember is lumber sizes are not what they are called. Okay, so a 2x4, which is a typical piece of lumber, actually measures 1.5 inches by 3.5 inches. Okay, a 2x6 is 1.5 by 5.5. There is a chart in the textbook in your readings that I suggest you excuse me there. I suggest you read that and commit it to memory. Okay. And if you're wondering why they are not the size that they are called, it's because when the lumber is cut at the sawmill, if they're going to run 2x4s, they cut them 2 inches by 4 inches uh, because they're using a rough cut saw blade. Okay, and then it goes through a planer and it mills it down uh, to the finished size of 1.5 inches by 3.5, and it's nice and smooth, and the corners are square. And then it goes to dry and it shrinks a little bit more. Okay, so that's why it's just easier to still call it a 2x4 as opposed to calling it a 1.5 by 3.5. Okay, but you need to memorize those sizes. Okay, so interior walls we would call a partition. Oftentimes, if we look right down here for the interior wall, most residential construction uses gypsum or drywall for the interior finish, and typically that's 1/2 inch thick. So for an interior wall, we would have a 2x4 stud, a layer of 1/2 inch gypsum or sheetrock on both sides, which gives us a wall thickness of 4.5, which is what we're going to use on our floor plan that we're drawing. Okay, if we have a 2x6 stud, like oftentimes in a bathroom wall, you'll use 2x6 studs or maybe even a 2x8 stud because you have to have room for the plumbing inside there. Um, so now we're talking a 5.5 inch stud and 1/2 inch sheetrock on either side. Okay, which gives you a wall thickness of 6.5. Okay, for exterior, it all depends on what type of sheathing you're going to have. Okay, but in our case, we're going to do our studs, 1/2 inch drywall on the inside, and I think, going from memory, I think we're using 3/4 inch sheathing on the outside. Now, if we had a brick or a stone facade or veneer, now we go ahead and draw that to the actual size because the brick is one size. It's just pretty much, that's just the way it is. So we would draw that to the size that it actually is. So here's a picture from a house that I toured once while we were doing some work. Uh, these are wall studs, okay? They go from the floor up to either the second bottom of the second floor or the bottom of the roof. They're called studs. And around the top, you have what's called a double top plate. And we use two of them. And at the corners, they overlap and intersect each other. Okay. This is what's called a header. This was supposed to be a garage door opening, and it got closed in after the framing was started. And so anytime you have an opening for a door or a window, you have to have what's called a header. If you notice over here over this window, There's a header right up here. This transfers load from the roof to either side of the opening. Okay, so the header distributes the load coming down from the roof, the weight, and it transfers it over to the sides that supports it. Okay, and so here's a kind of a bottom view. We got a concrete floor. This is a plumbing block out because I can't remember what was going in here. I want to say probably a shower or a bathtub, a shower, I believe. I, I don't remember actually, but you block it out where the plumbing comes up in case they have to adjust it around a little bit. And here you have plumbing lines coming in the house, okay, that was run under the floor and they come up. Uh, we have what's called a bottom plate and at the bottom of the wall, and this is pressure treated lumber. That's why it's green, okay. And then here you have the wall studs that go up. If you notice under a window opening, you've got a short studs here because you still have to have stuff to nail your siding to and things like that. Okay, so on either side of an opening, and these things are not going to work out on your normal 16-inch spacing. So we have what's called a king stud next to the opening, and the king stud goes all the way from the floor to the roof, just like a regular stud. It's just it's not on that 16-inch spacing. Next, we have what's called a trimmer stud, which goes here. We would have the king stud right here. It goes all the way up. Then we have trimmer studs that go up to the header. And the number of trimmer studs you need is based on the size of the header. And the size of the header is based on the size of the opening that you have. Okay. All right. So if we have a partial wall or we have guardrails, they have to be at least 36 inches high. And then in between them, in between the pickets or the rails, a space no greater than 4 inches. And that's to prevent a baby's head from going through there and getting stuck. Okay, and so here's an example of a balcony rail around a stairway. Okay. I thought I had taken these out. I'm going to stop right there on walls because we have another video about doors that I will get to in the next video.